Oh, Matt, what we've got here, this is one of the cutest and most easily recognized intertidal fishes. It's a suckerfish. And if I turn him over, you can see what's happened is that his pectoral fins and his pelvic fins here have been adapted to make a big round sucker. And he can actually stick onto the rocks with that. You see he's got this very flat underside. And then he can stick onto the rocks even in the crashing waves. Upside down fish, and he hangs on. So these suckerfish are very interesting because they're specialist predators on limpets. The little juveniles, these small crustaceans, amphipods and isopods and so on, but when they get to about this size, then they start feeding almost exclusively on limpets. They have a very broad mouth with two large canine teeth on the upper jaw and two large canine teeth on the lower jaw. And they'll sidle up to a limpet, and then you can see them looking intently at the limpet. And when the limpet lifts up and starts moving around, then the suckerfish gives a little waggle of its tail, and then it jumps up into the water and comes down on the limpet from directly above. And then they put two teeth under the one side of the limpet and the other two teeth under the other side of the limpet, and then they just flip the limpet off the rock and stick themselves down.
They must be very strong.
They're very strong, yeah. And they catch it by surprise. So then they've got the limpet in their mouth, like a huge little dinner plate, and then they just go and they swallow the whole thing, shell and all. And those shells actually accumulate in their stomach. So I've seen some very cool x-rays where people have x-rayed a large suckerfish, and there's a whole pile of dinner plates, like 6 or 8 dinner plates in its stomach. And then when it's full, then if the washing machine is full, it's had all its dinner, then it just regurgitates the shells out of its very large mouth, and then it's ready to go again. So they're very interesting fish. And they lay eggs under rocks and under ledges in the intertidal. And then the female actually guards those eggs, and then they hatch into little tiny suckerfish.
These large suckerfish, they get quite big, don't they?
Yeah, they get quite as long as my hand, and maybe weigh 300 grams or so. And sometimes you'll see them actually stuck onto the rock when the wave goes down, and they're like creeping up onto a limpet. So these little guys are actually quite happy out of water. But I've had him on my hand for a minute or two now, so I think I'll put him back. And he'll be perfectly happy. So this giant suckerfish is the largest and by far the most common species that we get on the coast here. But we do also get 2 other species. There's a little chubby suckerfish, which is only about 2 or 3 centimeters long, and usually just a single color like yellow or green. And you very often see them actually living inside dead mussel shells. And then the third one is quite an interesting one. It's a very small, slender species called the kelp suckerfish. Got a very complicated name, a Clinoichthyosiluriniceps. It's its Latin name, big name.
A winner.
Big name for a very small fish. So it's only a couple of centimeters long and very narrow, and it lives only on the fronds of kelps. And it's quite difficult to follow. When you see them and look at them, they always go around the other side of the kelp. So they're quite hard to photograph, but they're very, very cute and actually quite common.
And what do they eat? Because they don't have a different shape.
They stick onto the fronds of the kelp, and then on the surfaces of the kelp fronds, there are all sorts of tiny little crustaceans, little copepods and ostracods, and they feed on those little tiny crustaceans. In all of these suckerfish, the pectoral and pelvic fins have moved to the underside of the body, which has become flattened, and then they make themselves into a little sucker. So the animal just attaches itself onto the rock and then lifts itself slightly, and that causes a vacuum, and then the edges of the sucker hold it down, just like the sucker that you would use to hold things up on your fridge.
It's a lovely little piece of evolution. Imagine we could do that. We could walk up walls.